was so honored to speak with Jylani Ma'at. Jylani and I discussed taking off our masks and what it means to create spaces where people can be real. We talked about what it means to be in a practice and recognize our humanness and fallibility. Jylani shared about her relationship with the word liberation. As one born into a family of educators and medical practitioners, Jylani Ma'at's background as both a teacher and nurse came as no surprise. She inherited a legacy of traditional and alternative healing practices. Since a very young age, Jylani has been engaged in meditation, holistic wellness, and embodied awareness practices. As a teenager, she found herself making deep spiritual connections in nature and with stillness. She's continued along this path ever since. When Jylani became a mother, she realized just how important it was to be disciplined about her daily practice in order to stay balanced and healthy. She has an affinity for guiding people towards wellness modalities that connect with and through the body using all of their senses. Jylani believes being intentional and taking deliberate moments to pause can facilitate a deeper and embodied sense of awareness. This positionality will allow a feeling of authenticity and self-compassion that will support people in developing a regular, sustainable, non-judgmental practice. Jylani has trained and taught meditation, mindfulness, movement, and integrative nutrition in schools, meditation and yoga studios, and ethnically diverse communities around the world. Because Jylani enjoys learning healing practices from Indigenous cultures, she offers culturally sensitive and respect-centered programming. Her yoga teacher training with Tracy Stanley and Chanti Perez was by far the deepest and most embodied experience of her life. It was the purest example of using the body, breath, and stillness to achieve deep levels of inner peace, resilience, strength, and radiance. I hope you enjoy the interview with Jylani.
Welcome, Jylani. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, I'm excited. You said yes to this conversation about liberation and about grief. And we met, it's been over a year now in Berkeley. I was on my book tour driving across the country and came to Berkeley to lead a skill and action discussion and book reading, and you were there with your daughters, and I was really excited to meet you and connect with you there.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was more than I could have imagined. And like you said, I brought Janae and Kanoni with me, and having teenagers be moved, not just entertained, but to be moved is rare. So for the three of us to have shared that was fabulous. I'm really grateful that they came and that you were who you were. It worked out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll invite us to start with the centering before we dive into the conversation. So I invite you to find a comfortable way to be, if that's possible for you. Find a comfortable way to be in your body, and anyone watching or listening, I invite y'all to find a comfortable way to be. And maybe you'll close your eyes or soften your gaze, or you can keep your eyes open and focus on something that's grounding. And just take a moment to turn your attention to your breath and begin to feel your inhales and exhales. Now begin to deepen and lengthen your breath in your body. And as you deepen and lengthen your breath, I invite you to notice how you feel physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Notice what is present for you in this moment, at this time. And now I invite you to bring your awareness to your heart, your heartbeat, and your heart space, and to notice what's present there in your heart space. Perhaps your heart is holding something right now, or you're holding something in your heart. And take another 5 deep breaths in and out. And I invite you to blink your eyes open and to take a moment to reorient to the space. So I would love for you to share some about what you do in the world, your work, your practice, what you want people to know about you.
Yeah, so it's a journey, right? Having a practice is a journey. And in the present moment, my focus is very much alive and about opening your awareness and being more spacious to joy-centered and healing-centered modalities. So really approaching a sense of well-being within our bodies and owning that in every moment that's possible. I believe so much of our narratives circle around the trauma and the suffering and the grief. And there's a place for that, but having that balance and having this awakening and remembering of moments when it's not that, right? I think are the things that are most encouraging and help for sustainable practice and positive engagement in the world and just a really healthy outlook. So I'm really focused on facilitating groups and coaching and community programs that center well-being, healing, and the initiative to revive joy in our lives, to look at our circumstances and to see them from a lens of empowerment and liberation, and not to be overwrought and consumed by a narrative that doesn't fit the depth of who we are. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that's what I'm up to, directly in community, working with people, working with youth, working with the adults that are caring for the youth, and then in particular also women of color, and really helping them to frame and design narratives that are serving and healthy. So lots of good stuff.
Yeah, you are up to lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
You mentioned there's a place for grief, and your work is about well-being, and you mentioned joy. And so I'm curious to know, given that this summit is focused on grief and liberation, why it might be important to make space for us to talk about grief and liberation at this time.
Yeah, so the most important thing is that knowing that we hold that grief in our bodies. And if we're not looking at it, facing it, naming it, we can't address it and we can't heal from it. So a lot of my upbringing, especially as a child, was to be seen and not heard, right? So that cuts out self-expression. And then you hear, don't air your dirty laundry, right? So we're not going to talk about what's happening in the house outside. We're not going to share that with anybody. And then there was also the secrets that were almost like created to be norms. and needing to accept that as part of your female identity, part of your membership in the family, and just knowing that that was the background for your sense of being. And a lot of those things, I understand the intent and how they came about and the need for protection in our community, because there was a time when you could step out of the street and your parents knew that if you were out of line the smallest of bit, it could cost you your life, right? So there's a very protective measure around be very particular and very guarded and very masked when you step out into the world. So I understand the need for that historically. And I know and I can witness and I can embody the harm that that has caused. And it's time for us to move past that. So the grief, accessing the grief is our key to liberation. Like, we have to go through that fully aware, fully conscious, and fully embodied, and just kind of like that, go through the flames to get through the water. You know, I was reading something and it said, if you find yourself in hell, keep moving, because why would you want to stay there? Right? So we need to move through this hell that is a historical reality, and it's embodied in grief. We need to look at it, we need to hold it, we need to welcome it, and then we need to like kiss it and love it away so that there's space, right? Because we don't want to create a vacuum in our lives, because that's unintentional. So we move through and we deal with the grief, and then we find what we're going to replace it with. And that's where the joy and the compassion and the love comes in. We make so much more space in our bodies when we do that. So I'm not saying that we want to layer ourselves with grief, but we want to acknowledge what's already there. And we want to bring our full consciousness into where it's located in our bodies, right? Is it the thing that's causing the constant headaches? Is it the thing that's causing the high blood pressure, which is a problem? Is it the thing that's helping to facilitate the anguish, the frustration, and the fear that pervades our everyday? And that those kind of things halt our breathing. And when we're not breathing, we're not well, right? So it just comes full circle. So we need the grief to get to the healing. And I love that you're focusing that and bringing that up, so that we're not running from it as we've been doing historically. It's just not healthy. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you, I mean, you're clear about the reason it's important to focus on grief, and also that it's something we move through, right? So we need to give it attention and move through it to get to the liberation or an experience of joy. Can you share some about how you've done that in your own life, like your own process with that?
So Michelle, ever since I was young, I have a sibling, and he's almost 8 years younger than I am. So that means for 8 years, I'm on my own, right? I'm on my own in a home with parents, and I'm blessed to have a stepmom. So I had, 2 mothers and a father, and a very active, engaged home life and family life with grandparents and all kinds of things. So even though I didn't have other children around, I didn't have siblings for those 8 years, I had adults. And like I said, a lot of spaces, the adults would say, you're over here and we're over there. So in my aloneness, not to be mistaken with loneliness, in my aloneness, I created a space that was interesting and exciting and engaging, but also very internal, right? So my parents can tell you, I have no problems being by myself. And whether I'd be reading or creating, I found that in my mind and in my body, I could see and access a place of adventure, right? And I also could go and be safe when incidents in my household were not healthy, right? Like, I've witnessed domestic violence. I've witnessed substance use. I've witnessed I've witnessed poverty, and that's not to make any judgment on my parenting. It's situational, it's circumstantial, it's just reality. And I did that by getting quiet, by journaling, by resting, right? My parents will tell you to this day, I'm a big napper. And when I find myself feeling emotionally overwhelmed, I name it and I claim that. Like I name it and I claim that. Time of rest. So I'm big on napping. I'm really big on um, being in nature. If one thing that my parents did allow me to do regularly is to go outside. Like I feel for some of these young children these days who don't know what it is to play outside. And I could play outside with friends, or I could be just as happy in the backyard, in the grass, creating scenarios about who I was in my life and having this communication with Earth, right? And it always felt good to be outside. I'm from New York. I'm a Brooklyn girl and a Long Island girl. So I've had backyards. I've had access to the beach. I've gone to sleepaway summer camp. And my parents always allowed me to do that. And to this day, you know, you follow me on social media, you're like, my God, she stays at the beach. She's outside. She's in the mountains. I'm great on retreats because I like to communicate with nature and with the earth to really ground myself. I find that the time of my deepest suffering is when I'm not grounded, when I don't have access to be outdoors, right? Because when I'm outdoors, I'm most inside myself and I can come home to myself and I can sit for hours and hours. Inside, I can do the same. I just need a certain level of ambiance. And being a mom, having time to myself is not frequent. Right? I mean, they're older now, but I have to make the time to do that. And even in workspaces, I can be in a space amongst other people and not be there at the same time. Like, you know, that subway sleep. If you're from New York, people know how to have that subway sleep where your body's at rest, but your eyes are wide open as a protective measure. I have that down pat. So I try to feel into what it is and locate it in my body and just put all my focus on it. And I have this prayer cycle that I got. I have a family that was very engaged. My grandmother was a church person. And even now I still have a church home back in Brooklyn, and I can hear those prayers running through me and running through my body where I'm just calling in like, I need your help. And when I do that, it's so peaceful. It's so peaceful. Yeah. So, and hugs. Heart to heart hugs really helped my mood.
Yeah, connection.
Yeah, connection for sure. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the natural world and how you can be outside or in the natural world for hours, right? And also, to me, it sounds like you like to communicate with the natural world, right? There are messages there.
For sure.
And I'm wondering if there are other rituals that you engage to help support you in feeling grounded and in moving through grief so you can find liberation.
Oh, yeah. So I have an ancestral practice where I'm deeply embedded in remembering and reviving the energy of ancestors. And because I come from a predominantly female household, my dad is very much a part of my life, my whole life. My grandfather's not as much, you know? So I have all this lineage of women who have exhibited strength that I knew. And then as they have come and gone, right? And knowing their stories and the stories of the women that impacted them, I have this ancestor worship practice that I go to. And so that's there because I have a deeply Southern family, and we often called on, even in our grace, right, which is every meal, calling on and giving thanks to those before us. So that's just a natural thing. And then my Ifa practice, which is an indigenous African culture, I have been inducted into that. So that's deeply earth-based. And I can call on Orishas, which are representatives of the natural elements in the world, and calling in on that and just making the connection between my experience, recognizing that they're temporary and that there's a place for those things to be held. So just knowing that as I desire to release what isn't serving me, the earth will hold it and recycle that for me. And that there are ancestors who have a wisdom that I don't have, and asking them just to see me and to feel what I'm experiencing and be with me, right? This sense of being with those beyond my present state, and just knowing that they're going to hold me. They're going to hold me. I have an aunt who passed in childbirth in July, and I'm born in November. And my parents gave me a middle name for her. And since the moment of learning about that, she's been one of my direct ancestral spirits that I know has held me. So oftentimes my grandmother, God rest her soul, would say, your aunt came. The only thing she would say, one of the things that got me through losing my daughter was you coming soon after. And I know that she wouldn't abandon me and that she would make space to hold you. And I kept that. And she really believed that in my aunt passing, a new birth came, a new female birth came into our family, and that first person was me. So I just hold all that love, and having had 4 generations of women alive when I was born, and seeing those pictures and trying to have a sense, like an embodied sense and remembrance of those things. So I'll go to the pictures of them. I'll go to my altar. I'll go outside and plant an intention, right? I do things directly in earth. I go to the water, right? I'm big in my Yemaya practice, in my Obatala practice. I'm big in going to the earth and giving thanks, right? That connection of earth and gratitude and celebration and formal recognition is really big for me. And you see it everywhere in my life, and recognizing things on my day-to-day that confirm that, right? Something will happen and I'll be like, oh, that's an Ifa sign to me. Or, oh, that's, my aunt or my grandmother. I'll listen, right? As an educator, one of the certifications that I have is a Montessori teacher. And the focus of that is observation, right? To be able to follow the child. And that said, it always, what drew me to it was following a spirit of a child, right? And I always, to this day, believe that that's where the real innocence of life is. But in that observation, you see the most innocent and sincere engagement of children with each other and their relationship to the world. That simple curiosity is it's pure love. It's pure love and curiosity and inquiry. And I like to sit and observe. I love to sit and observe. So my rituals are around connection to present happenings, present occurrences, what are rising, and connecting them with my spiritual context and my belief system. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Powerful rituals, you named.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you mentioned your aunt who transitioned during childbirth, and then you have her middle name. You have her middle name. What is your middle
Yvonne.
name?
Let's call her into the space.
Yeah.
Her name is Yvonne, for sure. And it doesn't matter who I meet along my journey. And it's incredible because I've met people who knew her, right, as a young person and as an adult. And they would say, oh, your aunt. When I think about your aunt, she was amazing. She was the life of your family. Like, they always refer to her with loving intent. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be somebody on my dad's side of the family. It could be a distant cousin that I recently met from someplace else. And they always invoke this sense of incredible compassion and love that she exhibited.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you have her with you all the time and that you called her into this space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what are some lessons that grief has taught you, given that you've gone through a process of grief, and everyone grieves. It's one of the reasons I'm inviting people to this conversation, to sort of normalize a conversation about grief and loss, individually and collectively. And what lessons do you feel like grief has taught you?
It's so incredible that we're having this discussion right now, because in August, one of my grandmothers passed. So my last remaining grandmother passed, and her name is Lilia Brown Clark, right? My grandmother, from the moment of the awareness that I was coming has been an angel for me. If I had to pick a person, an adult who provided stability, unconditional love, and deep wisdom, it would be her. And I say that because my parents were young when I was born. They were 19 and 20, right? So if you can imagine being 19 and 20 and being tasked with having a child, right? They're barely out of high school themselves. And how does a family raise a person with that situation, right? They're kids themselves, still under the guise of their own parents, right? They were both still living at home at this time. Where is the foundation and the grounding for that infant, for that being that's going to keep them safe? That foundation was my grandmother. And I'm 50, right? So for 50 years, the one person who lived in the same place, who spoke the same language, whose food was emotionally and physiologically nourishing, that one person left the earth. A paradigm I knew it, right? I'm an adult person. I know about life and death. I've given birth, so I know the opposite, the reality, right? But I had never conceptualized my life on this planet without her. It's December, and I just invoking her name. I'm still grieving. Mm-hmm. I would imagine I will always be grieving. And at her funeral, and I'm big on ceremony, right? I'm big on ceremony. My Ifa practice has led me into some of the most amazing transitional ceremonies, right? Because there's power in ancestral spirit. And I know this. There's a deep knowing that I have about this. So I embraced that. As soon as I got the news, I'm in California, my family's back east. I already felt it. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, dementia. I knew it was coming. I was the one person who, she never forgot me. She never forgot my name. At the sound of my voice, she would come into the present moment. She could say, "How are the girls?" She might repeat what she's saying over and over again, but she was present with me. And everybody would just be like, "Oh my gosh, you and your grandmother have this relationship." Mm-hmm. Grief has taught me to be firm in my beliefs, right? Because in my grief, I'm experiencing loss. And in experiencing that loss, it provided this, some scar, this cloudiness of what I know to be true, that she's never leaving me. She's the energy and transformation. And the grief called me to have to honor that practice and to just be like, you can get up, you can move forward, you can embody and call on that energy in the ways that you've done it when the loss wasn't so deeply personal. Because in losing her, I lost a piece of my foundation. And recognizing, you know, so I'm two grandmothers down, I'm two aunts down, and I'm just like, sweetie, this is the natural cycle of things. And this grief is showing you that you're rising in, right? That Black Lotus rising, that is the company, that is our brand. It's not only about coming up out of the mud, it's about coming into your fullness and your embodied aliveness, right? So the grief that I'm holding reminds me of my aliveness, and it awakens my dharma, right? My purpose. Like, time is not infinite, and you need to be in this moment doing what it is that you're meant to do. And because my grandmother embodied such love, it just really flipped all of the distractions and gave me a sense of focus. That grief that I hold for her in my heart is the light, it's the arrow, it's the compass to do this work and to reach and to feel into people's individual grief, and to be able to make space to hold, right? Not necessarily, I'm a facilitator of people accessing their healing, but I don't claim anybody else's healing but my own, right? But I have I have a new part of my story, so that when I'm identifying and witnessing someone else's grief, I identify that, right? I could immediately identify. It doesn't always have to be the loss of a grandparent.
Mm-hmm.
It could be anything that someone is naming as their grief. But just having that connection with any body, right? Any body is something that we share. It's part of the balance of this human experience. And now, yeah, my story has this chapter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my story has this chapter. That grief is alive, and it lives and it works and it dances with my joy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think about her and feel the grief and not think about the light that she was and is and continues to be for me. Those things are inseparable. So now that I know how to partner those things, I can do that with everything in my life now. It's that much more real. And because it's so recent and immediate, it informs my work in a way that nothing else has, right? No reading, no book, no scripture, no song. This has made this work so much more concrete for me, and reminding me that I have the breath that she doesn't have, that I've inherited. So now this is another layer to the breath. And this is a layer that isn't abstract, right? So the other ancestral work could potentially be abstract. This is concrete and extremely relevant. So I carry her in my body, carry her in my body as a source of grief and love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like you carry her in your body and your heart, and like your aunt, she's around you. And it also, your grandmother's transition confirmed your work, or reconfirmed your purpose, right? Your practice, in a way that may be different with other transitions or losses you've experienced in your life. And I have a similar experience with my grandmother, who passed away 2 years ago, where I was like, okay, I'm clear now about what I need to do and where I need to be, and just the power of ancestors, and even in the moment of transition, telling us what we need to be doing, which is what my grandmother was doing when she was transitioning energetically. She couldn't speak, but she was definitely telling me some things, and I felt them and listened and heard. So I appreciate what you shared about your grandmother being in your body, and that part of the reason I think we grieve is because we love so much. I mean, that's part of what I heard too, right? The grief is an expression of love and light for her, and how important she is as an energy now in your life. And it makes everything you shared about her, and just allowing yourself to grieve and recognizing that it's an ongoing process. That feels like something we need to practice collectively, right? Like culturally, and when I say culture, dominant culture really doesn't let us do that. And so that's what I'm talking about. Culturally, we may have practices, ceremonies, rituals we engage in, and we're not encouraged to practice ritual or ceremony. So what could it look like for us to practice what you named with your experience with your grandmother on a collective scale? Like, what could that look like? What might that look like?
So I'm glad you asked that, because in my circles, right? So currently I co-facilitate a group, Sister Sits, and I also belong to an organization, and we do a Women of Color circle. We directly open ceremony with an ancestral practice and gratitude offering, right? So sitting in circle, in the center of the circle, we have an altar. We have an altar that everybody can place something, an object, or just write a name and place it there. We call out the names of those that we want to bring into the space, right, for strength in our practice. We during our practice, we go into a time of remembering, right? A calling in, a moment of deep love and joy that we want to use as an anchor right? Because those kind of things, even when you don't have something tangible, you still have your sense of knowing and you still have a sense of remembering, right? So it's not like, oh, I need my mala to be able to recite my mantra, or, oh, I need my candle in order to, you don't need everything that you need, you have. And just remembering that, and to say, when you see another person, see them, right? See them as a dimensional being who is experiencing something, and just have an intention of metta, right? Just being like, I'm gonna send you some love and kindness on a superficial level if you don't know them, and on a more direct and intentional level if you do. You know, I'm a Brooklyn girl all day, every day, right? So I'm bussing, I'm walking, I'm subway, right? I'm in LA now, which is a little less so most of the time because we're in cars, but I'm used to looking at people and looking at situations and assessing, right? And before I had my practice, it would be clouded with judgment. Oh my God, what are they doing? They're this. And I had these stories about people on site. Now, my practice has informed me and taught me and held me in a way that I'm growing to see the dimensions, right? The layers of a human experience. So collectively, I say, just see a person and hold compassion for those layers, because you don't have the knowing, right? You see my skin, you don't know my story, right? You think you do, because there's this false narrative about who I am. You hear, oh, there's Jylani, she's single mom, boom, story. Right? You know what I mean? Oh, or even, you know, there's Jylani, she's a meditator, boom, story. No, I go from the cushion to cussing in 90 seconds. It's very possible. Like, I'm very human. There's no one way that I am all the time. You know, there's no one way that I am all the time. I'm working to have certain traits and to hold values and beliefs that guide my behaviors and my thoughts and all that. But it's a work, it's practice. That's why we call it a practice. It's ongoing, it's every day. And I think, no, I don't think, I know collectively we have to center our own healing so that we have the capacity to appreciate, respect, and consider and love other people on a regular basis. But it doesn't come without centering your own healing. Like, individually, we need to be doing that. And collectively, we need to be sharing and talking and being honest and unapologetic about what that is. Like, entering into spaces and saying, I am taking off my mask because it's not serving me to hide who I am. And it's not serving you, because then you don't get to know the truth. And if you don't have the truth, then you can't engage with me in an honest way, right? If I don't give you my truth and own it, then that means that you have to operate with me from your story about me. That doesn't serve us. That's dangerous. It's harmful. It's very harmful. So knowing that it's important for us to access our truth is an individual and collective act. And I feel like when we come together in ways that feel comfortable, right? Because I can't, even as a facilitator of groups, I can only affect an environment as much as I can on the outside. And I would like to invite people into a space that feels safe. But when a person walks in, that's their work to assess whether it's safe or not, right? I've been in so many places and people say, I've created a safe space. You can only create safety for yourself. You can't create safety for me because you don't know what I'm walking in with, right? So I just like to say that when we gather, we want to set an intention of offering people the opportunity to create safety for themselves. But in creating safety for yourself, you have to go through what you're talking about, that grief. You have to have that sense of awareness of, this is what I need to manage this, and having the strength and giving yourself permission to say that, right? How much I speak for myself. I've lived a life where I thought I had to ask for permission all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that 8-year-old and that 7-year-old that rightfully so was asking for permission then, sometimes she shows up in this body now.
Yeah.
And I'm just learning, no. I need to be gentle, and I need to communicate in loving ways as often as that's possible, but I need to communicate, right? So an individual sense of communication, authenticity, and honesty, and a collective knowing that we need to do that for each other. We need to witness without judgment. And then to just say, I'm just gonna be here to love and to hold and to witness you. That's it. That's community.
Right.
That's the commune, that's the unity, that's the forest and the trees and the plants all being in community, doing their own individual thing, but building and creating sustenance and nourishment for us, right? Apple trees aren't trying to be orange trees, and they're not trying to tell apple trees what to do. They're doing what they do and being in the spaces and sharing the oxygen and the carbon dioxide so it works. And people, we need to be doing that. We need to be doing that too. We need to be doing that too.
I feel like you answered my last question about collective liberation and what you just said around how we show up and how we create safety for ourselves and how we witness people and have self-awareness to understand the narratives we hold and how those are playing out. And if there's anything else you want to say about what collective liberation means, I'd love to hear it. I just feel like you started to answer that.
Yeah, collective liberation. It's so funny. The word liberation, it always triggers me because I've done a lot of work with youth who were detained, right? So I've been behind the gated door that slams behind you.
Yeah.
And I've seen the rooms that are literally cells that have cots and toilets and sinks. And in those spaces, we have 13, 14, and 15-year-olds. And in doing the work that I've done, doing the work that I do, looking into those young people and realizing as an adult that I failed them, right? And the community of adults that I walk with has failed them. So when I hear liberation, I always go to them because as a job, they press the button, the door slides open, and I walked out. And I get in my car and I'm allowed to go and live my life. And I was leaving those children behind. You don't have to be a mother or a parent to know that's excruciating. And these are not children that I was born to know or even in my immediate family in any way. These members of my community, but I didn't know these children before I engaged in this work, right? So when I think about liberation, I literally think about opening those doors, removing those doors, removing the whole structure that thinks that even makes sense to deal with another person. There's nothing restorative about that. There's nothing healing about that. And I live in a culture, in a society that thinks imprisoning, removing people from the outdoors, from sunlight, from moonlight, from fresh air, is somehow restorative and healing. And that's a macro issue that speaks to the micro issue of all of us feeling entombed and imprisoned in suffering and grief and injustice and racism. Like, that's imprisonment. So our collective liberation means that we have to dismantle those structures immediately that hold us to something that is not restorative in the least. It's just not, right? These thought processes that we have that are so embedded in our core, so embedded in our neural pathways, all of that has to shift. We have to come into a new knowing. Like new pathways have to be formed before we can even get that, because I could sit for hours. I love it. And then I come out of it with a more liberated sense of what has to be done. Right? That's the current liberation that I'm experiencing, is walking with, knowing, breathing into what has to be done, and seeing it all around me and putting my hand on it, my foot on it, my arms around it, and saying, not anymore.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm not doing it. Like I'm surrendering to the well-being of the collective by saying, let's just love ourselves out of this thing. It was transformative. You know, Reverend Angel's work. I love it. I love that it speaks directly. I love that that book is a dialogue, right? And I have to say that Angel's first work was more transformative to me than so many other things around spirit, the so-called Blackness,
right,
the spiritual work and the walk that we take toward that, right? I've been in and out of so many different spiritual modalities. And the one thing that I know to be true is the love centering, right? That thing that makes somebody jump up in a Baptist church and run around is a embodied sense of love and testimony that is not containable. Where is that in our practice right now?
Right.
Where is that jump up, shout out, and run around the space because you're feeling this embodied love for everybody in the room? And knowing that there's something bigger than us that's holding us with that love.
Right.
You know, it's like the child that you see playing in the dirt and they just fall out into it and they're just held on it. They're not thinking about if bugs are getting on them. They're not thinking about if they're dirtying their clothes. They're just feeling held in joy. That sense of collective liberation is witnessable. It is spiritually tangible. It's very possible. And I'm feeling it right now. I'm getting excited just talking about it. And what I loved about you, meeting you that first day in that yoga studio, it was a diverse group of people, and your intentionality wasn't even necessarily to talk to me or to my daughters. It was other people in the space that you wanted to make your work come alive. What I got out of it was, here is this woman of color. And at that point, I didn't know anything about you. I don't know how you identify. You could be of mixed race. There's a million stories. The truth was undeniable about what was happening in contemplative spaces around the work, the process, the belief, and the journey. It was undeniable. That's the collective liberation, facing the things that are true. Living with them, celebrating them, mourning them, right? My God. If we did that,
well, we are doing it through this conversation, right?
We are.
And, you know, these conversations hopefully will reach a lot of people. And so that's a way of spreading this content and the practice of grieving and dreaming up, like what ought to be when we dream about collective liberation. I think that's part of the offering through this, and the different ways people think about liberation, believe in it, and the different ways they think about how we build it too. So there are different ways to be. So I appreciate you sharing everything you have and bringing your ancestors into the space and the conversation. I mean, they were coming in anyway, so they were going to be here.
Can't help that part, right? That's that part.
That's how they are. And I would love for you to share anything that's coming up in 2020 that you want folks to know about. And if you want people to know how to find you, you can share that too. That will also be on the webpage as well.
Yeah. So first, there's so many ways to find me with technology, right? There's my Facebook and my Instagram, Jylani Ma'at, Black Lotus Rising. I encourage people, anybody who's watching this, find what I'm saying and find me in your heart, right? Find my energy, find the message that I'm hoping to convey and share out into the world, my calling. Find that in your heart and allow that sense of radiance to inform your testimony and your desire to be honest. I'm working this summer with IBME, and IBME is an organization that works with teens to bring them on mindfulness retreats. This year, 2019, was our first Teens of Color retreat. Out of the history of the organization, it has never happened. Something that was near and dear to my heart that I conceptualized when I first started working with the organization probably 6 years ago came to fruition summer 2019. We had a lot of financial issues because IBME has a mission to never keep anybody out of retreats due to finances, right? So it's challenging to be able to raise that much money. And we're staying in retreat centers, right? Not horrible situations that, are not worthy of receiving young people and empowering them, right? Having them have a sense of deserving of fabulous and wonderful, welcoming places. 2020, we have 2 of those retreats. Wow. One on the East Coast and the West Coast, both already funded. Talk about joy.
Yeah.
Okay. As of November 2019, they were already funded.
That's awesome.
Is spirit not good?
I know.
Is spirit not good? So that's the thing nearest and dearest to my heart. I also have a series coming out specifically for healing for the healers. This work that we do is hard on the body, it's hard on the spirit, it's hard on the soul.
Yeah.
And I go on retreats and half of it I spend crying and releasing. It's like that laying of hands on that I call is like a grandmother's hug.
Right.
Where are we going to get that from?
Right.
And, for me, I teach and I share what I know and what I need. Right. And I know I have this need, which means that it's also present in other spaces. So the Healing of Healers series is coming up, my continued work with women and resting, taking care of myself, mothering in authentic and healthy ways. So I'm also working with demographics of girls which is something I've been doing for about 15 years now, who have experienced sex trafficking, rape, molestation, sexual indignation, right? And loving into them the spaces that have been bruised and giving them skills, tools, and rituals they can continuously access, because I don't know that there's a full healing from that. But I hope and I imagine that there's a way of being with it that informs greater senses of joy and purposeful engagement. Yeah. So I'm just trying to sprinkle some love on folks.
A lot of love. You're doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of practice.
It's life sustaining, right? I think we do what we need and what we love. So my background is in education and nursing, and I've traveled this course, to this point now that I'm in my jump up from the pews and shout and scream. I'm in that moment, as well as holding the grief that we talked about. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm in. It's luminous. You're luminous. You making this offering is luminous. You know, I think no matter what somebody's spiritual context or religious context, there's this looking up, right? That sky, that view to the sky, right? So we're either, in our spirituality, we're either looking up or we're looking down. So we're going up into the sky or we're going down into the earth. And our journey, our life experience is everything in between. So I'm making space for myself. I'm being more expansive, and I'm trying to see what comes. So these are the things that I have on the calendar right now. And I don't know what else is going to happen, because I also believe that when you go, I'm in community, right? But when I'm in community, I need to identify what my community members say they're needing in the moment.
Right.
What I think might be necessary may be completely different than this smaller micro group within the macro. So I'm observing and I'm listening and I'm watching and I'm collaborating with people. So I could get some information today that might lead me into a new area, something else to bring in to the love, right? I'm finding also that I'm replacing the word work with love.
Right.
How I apply love, where I apply love, creating that love is my lineage legacy.
Yes.
Right? I want my grandmother's legacy was love. It's undeniable. And I want that too. I want that to be my legacy. When my ashes get scattered in the ocean, I just want everybody to have felt loved. Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful, to replace the word work with love and to share about your legacy so clearly. And thank you for being you.
Yeah.
And being love, and for being in this conversation and practice with me. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited about what's to come in 2020. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting this and inviting me. You're such an exhale. Deep, loving, embodied exhale. Thank you for that.
Thank you.